When you go into writing a first draft, it's almost completely psychology that is what gets you through it. You don't need talent, you don't need to have a thorough understanding of the plot. The first draft doesn't ask a lot of you, except for that you just finish it. And so I do think it's largely mindset based. When we're sitting down to write a first draft, our brain's only frame of reference as far as what we want that draft to inevitably look like is a final draft. I have realized that my brain does not necessarily pursue perfection as much as it pursues uniformity. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another video. Oh my God. I always sit in this chair and it just rotates if it's left to its own devices. It's kind of an awkward setup. Ignore that. Anyway, welcome back to another video. I hope you guys have had a wonderful month. It's been a little while since I've posted, and for good reason, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in today's video. Before I dive in, if you're new here, welcome. Make yourselves comfortable. I'm Anna. I am a full-time... What's my spiel? I'm a full-time book editor, indie author. I currently have one book published and I'm working on final drafting its sequel. And I'm also working on the first draft of a brand new fantasy project that I'm calling Project Godspell. I'll be talking about both of those projects in today's video, as well as giving you some really interesting updates because, shockingly, I have not only been working on both of these projects at the same time, but sometimes in the same day. And I have for years claimed that I was unable to do that. Truly, for years I thought that I just would never be able to work on two books at the same time, that was just not me, it was not my style, I wasn't capable of it. That has changed, and that's something I want to talk about as well, because I think this is going to be somewhat of a game changer. Why is my hand like this? Somewhat of a game changer for a lot of you, because it has been for me. So I want to talk about it now, but we're gonna wait until later, Anna. We're gonna wait until later. Ultimately, the goal of this video is to just stay on track. I have done a really good job of not only recovering from the burnout and the very public crash out that I unfortunately decided to include in my previous video, and that I now kind of regret, but it's okay. I need to make sure that I'm actually using the biggest benefit of being a book editor to my advantage, and that is making time for my own writing. My lips are so dry. Hold up. Do I have chapstick in here? Okay. Apologies. Anyway, let's circle back to the whole problem of burnout last month. I decided to take a step back from editing ever so slightly. As a book editor, I have 3 different avenues of income. I have a publisher that I work for, and then I have my own established clients who I'm working with pretty much year round. And then I have the avenue of new clients. And I talked about this a little bit in my previous video, so I'm not going to rehash it here. The decision to close to new clients has been actually a very good one for me. I will not be reopening to new clients until early next year. So if you feel like you would like to work together sometime in January of 2026, let me know. I honestly can't fully guarantee that I will be opening that soon, but definitely let me know anyway, just so I have you on my radar. But and I did have a couple of you squeeze in very last minute right before I officially closed to new clients, so welcome. I got 2 of you last minute. I'm so excited to work on your projects. But overall, the choice to step back from taking on new clients and just work with my established clients and with the publisher that I work for has been a superb life choice. I have felt so much better, so much more balanced, and this has allowed me to put my own writing front and center for the first time pretty much all year, and that has felt so good. I have made a ton of progress over the last month, not just on Project Godspell, but on A Dark Sky Opens. And I have so many insights that I can't wait to talk to you guys a little bit more about, particularly as it pertains to the different mentalities involved in writing a first draft versus a final draft, how to work on 2 different projects at once, and then also some takeaways that I've gleaned regarding writing a first draft. Over the years, I have discovered that me as a creative and the way that I like to approach a first draft is definitely a little different than most people. And it goes against a lot of the advice that you see recycled and regurgitated in a lot of online writing spaces, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. I'm really trying to make this introduction brief. I tend to like jump straight into these really extensive topics of conversation right away, and I'm trying to part ways with that a little bit and explore a new video layout style where we sit down, we have a little bit of an introduction, we get to work, we have some beautiful, calming, nice to look at B-roll, and then we leap into some more in-depth discussions later down the line. But yeah, I'm going to be diving into the meat and potatoes of a lot of these different takeaways that I've come away with recently regarding first drafting, final drafting, working on 2 books at once, like sometimes in the same day, and then also what my first drafting process looks like and how it differs. Like I know that that kind of touches on like originally what I just said, working on a first draft and a final draft at the same time, but the first draft mentality that I have adopted to get myself through Project Godspell, I think has been better than ever, and it is psychological. When you go into writing a first draft, it's almost completely psychology that is what gets you through it, because you don't need talent, you don't need to have a thorough understanding of the plot. The first draft doesn't ask a lot of you, except for that you just finish it. And so I do think it's largely mindset based and it's very psychological. And I want to talk a little bit more about the way my psychology has changed as I have approached the first draft of Project Godspell. Because it has changed. I think as creatives, we're always evolving, we're always changing. And as a book editor, I'm even grabbing on to different process changes and tweaks and alternatives when I'm editing. You know, I'm like, oh, this is a great way to go about it. I'm going to do this next time. So to stay in the same place is really not the goal for any of us as creatives. I think that that is another takeaway that I've kind of had recently regarding working on 2 projects at once, which I was adamant for years that I couldn't do. And to now be working on both of those projects at once consistently has been such a delightful change of pace. Anyway, I'm going to close out with you now. We're going to go bust out my iPad because my cat chewed on the screen of my laptop, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. I didn't. My cat quite literally destroyed my laptop screen, so I need to go get it fixed. Thank God I have an iPad, so I've been working on that, and I'm going to be taking that to the living room now and just getting some nice, beautiful sunlight in. I'm going to be taking my cute little incense, what is it, holder? A stove? It's like for Palo Santo, but I absolutely love it. It's so cute. Let's get to some writing, and I will touch base with you later, probably after I make some banana nut bread and get even more writing done. So I'll talk to you this afternoon, in other words. All right, let's go.
Just round the block, he sit there drinking, ready to run. Thought I'd be better by now, but I can make my feet move along. And as soon as I see you, I forget about it. Just as soon I get used to letting you go. A fickle heartbeat and I'll go blind. You feel exactly every void I have inside. I'm your Valerie, like a rock, but still I try so hard to be something I'm not. So show me love and I will show up. Prove me wrong, this time you won't stop. Or you go your way and I will go mine. 'Cause never will I ever be blinded by love again. Jen calls crying, she's lost. Met her ex and now she's back to the start. I gave her my best advice. She did the same but couldn't change my mind. And as soon as I see you, I forget about it. As soon I get used to letting you go. So show me love and I will show up. Prove me wrong, this time you will stop. Or you go your way
we are back with our first check-in for the day. I definitely was planning to make this check-in later this afternoon, but I had an opportunity to sort of hit pause. I was at a good stopping point, and I thought it would be nice to sit down and have the rest of this coffee that I definitely do not need to be drinking with you, and also provide you some updates. Oh my God, I feel like my hair is just... My hair is just not cooperating. I'm also really sweaty and shaky because I've had too much coffee and here I am drinking some more, as one does. Am I the only one who comes out of a deep writing session feeling kind of insane? I'm fully submerged in another world and then I kind of come back out of it and it genuinely feels like coming out of a nightmare or out of a dream. I say nightmare not because writing is nightmarish, but because nightmares tend to be a little more gripping, like they're a little more jarring when you come out of them. I don't know. That's just kind of how I feel right now. Anyway, today's writing session has gone really, really well so far. I've made a lot of progress. However, I did make my first official miniature departure from my plot. You probably will see B-roll of these bad boys. This is my entire plot for the book. If you have not seen my video on how I plot using index cards, I will drop a card in one of these corners and you can go check it out because I feel like it's a great way to plot. That's why I love using index cards, is they tend to be the perfect amount of space to brainstorm what you want the plot point to look like without going overboard. This morning I finished writing a scene in a brand new character POV, and I was sort of debating whether or not I wanted to add more to the chapter. My chapters tend to be a little bit long. However, this book is very suspenseful. It's very deep instead of shallow. It's thought-provoking, it's uncomfortable, it's not very high action, at least not in the beginning. And so I'm thinking about offsetting that slower pace with quicker chapters, which I think will just help finesse the reading process. Like, you don't want to pair a long, I don't want to say boring, because it's definitely not boring, but a longer chapter with a slower pace. That's just not usually a good combination. I tend to prefer shorter chapters with a slower pace or vice versa. So that is kind of what I was looking at today, is this new character POV who I haven't written in so long. It's so weird to kind of know a character for so many years. And then to finally write in their POV, it feels really fantastic. Anyway, ended up writing in that character's POV and I finished a scene, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to flesh it out. I wasn't sure if I wanted to add more to it or add less. My chickens are gonna start singing their egg songs. I apologize, you're gonna hear them in the background. There's no getting around it. They're incredibly proud of their eggs. Good job, ladies. Anyway, so I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in terms of this chapter, because if I were to end it at the end of this scene, it would be too short, even for the slower pace, because I do try to shoot for around 3,500 words minimum per chapter. And so I ended up making my first miniature departure. That's really what I'm trying to get around to, is I made my first miniature departure from my plot by adding an additional scene to this chapter in this character's POV. And that's also because I'm kind of avoiding a necessary formatting issue where I cannot decide if I want to have POVs be specific to chapter or specific to scene. Typically what authors do is they'll include, I'm gonna shut the window, hang on. I truly don't know if that's actually gonna help, but we have multiple ladies singing right now and it's a little distracting. Anyway, typically the way that multiple POV narratives are formatted is they will include a scene per POV. So we're talking third person limited, obviously. Third person omniscient, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started. Don't get me started. I hate that POV, I hate it. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is I have started using these really elaborate chapter heads that include the POV character, the location, and then a chapter title. And I have just loved it. And I don't want to disrupt the continuity of those chapter heads by shifting POVs in the middle of a chapter, which would then require me to change the scene break to mirror that formatting. I don't know, I will figure it out later, but it's bothering me right now. Anyway, If I were to give you any advice on character voice, it would be this, regardless of POV. In order to write a character's voice well, you need to make sure that the narrative is imbued with their subjective bias. They're going to be looking at certain things in the environment that are going to be sentimental or something that appeals to them, something that they like. They're not going to look at the environment objectively and report on it objectively. So deeply consider what that character would be drawn to look at, how they would feel about that environment, how they're going to respond emotionally to that setting, and how that's going to differ from the objective reality of what that world looks like. And then that's when you're going to really start to nail voice. Voice is just bias. Let's all say it together. It's just bias. And that's also why when you're writing dialogue, you need to be very careful about paying attention to what characters are saying and why they're saying it. Dialogue is not just about getting information to the reader. There's a lot of subtext involved. There's a lot of unspoken meaning. There are characters who are realistically not going to contribute to dialogue, and then there are other characters who are going to be pushy and be kind of bully-ish in a dialogue, where they're going to shove other people out of the way in order to get their own message across, and they're going to have no problem doing that. And so I think it's important to just really get a handle on each character, how they feel, what they think, what their temperament is like. We're not even going to get me started on dialogue. I will talk about that possibly later in this video or just another day in a separate video, because I could talk about it forever. But as far as character voice is concerned, that's really what I was tapping into today, and that was what I was having more fun with. That was what opened my mind to including an additional scene to this chapter in that other character's POV, because I really wanted to contrast the protagonist, and her scene is coming up after this. They're going to be in the same setting, interacting with each other, and I wanted to have that compare and contrast. I wanted to see how two characters would look at the same setting so profoundly differently and react and report on it differently. Let's circle back to drafting. This is a first draft. I did not pay any attention to how many words I wrote this morning. I don't tend to look at word count. That's just something that doesn't motivate me anymore. I look at the word count more so for pacing and for something that's going to fit with the age category and the genre of the book. Those are the logistical reasons that I'm looking at word count. I don't really care about word count in any other capacity. I don't use it to monitor how I'm progressing through the book. I know all too well that you can write 5,000 words in a day and then scrap them all because they suck. I am definitely the kind of person who advocates for a first draft where you are writing at a pace which is enjoyable, because remember, writing is supposed to be fun, enjoyable, and higher quality. Not high quality, but higher quality. High enough quality that this draft is actually going to count for something. It's going to be a little bit more than just a first draft. Maybe it'll take you to the third draft level. That's sort of the goal that I'm getting at, because I do not want to write a zero draft. I don't want to write a book that I'm going to have to scrap and completely rewrite. I just don't have the time for that. So I advocate for taking your time, putting forth your best work, enjoying it, feeling proud of your work, but not overthinking it and not holding yourself to the standard of this is what needs to be published. And I think in order to remind myself of that, I have had a lot of fun with looking at, this is the first book that I have published and the only book that I have published right now. I have pulled previous drafts of this book just to remind myself of how far it has come. So this is actually the first draft of the book. I had it printed way back when on CreateSpace, and this is the first draft. I can't believe I still have it. This is literally the only copy. And what is incredible is to go back and read through this draft and see how much I've kept and how much I have not kept. Then I've got the first iteration of the book. This is actually a cover that was illustrated by my sister, and I kept it in the now final cover of the book. You can see it kind of in the background. It's just been interesting to go back and to not only prove to myself that I have written a book from start to finish. Sometimes it's nice to remind yourself of that, but also I have written a book that has changed drastically from start to finish, and that's kind of the way that it should be, but not so drastically, because there are still scenes in this book that exist in the final draft. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and finish this break, and then I will get back to working a little bit later, and I will talk to you more about drafting, first drafting, and A Dark Sky Opens, and everything else later. Okay, let's go. You get me.
The recording still?
Yeah.
Recorded that last week and get it into the pit because you actually got a decent front flip on you.
I knew this was going to be too low. Hang on. Okay. I got a little pillow and I've got my favorite Olipop. Ignore my nails. I'm going to do them. I do all of my nails at home, by the way. I finally decided to pull the trigger and get like everything that I needed to get to do at home gel manicures, and it has been a game changer. It is currently storming outside, so I decided to sit on the floor in order to capture as much light as I possibly can and finally talk to you guys about everything that I've wanted to talk about in today's video. As you saw over the last few days, I ended up kind of not writing and instead having fun, which I should have predicted because it was my partner's birthday. So we ended up taking the weekend off and just enjoying ourselves. And I did keep up with writing though, and I did keep up with my routine of working on... I actually just said the real title. I did keep up with my routine of working on Project Godspell in the morning and then A Dark Sky Opens in the afternoon. And I was able to document some of that, like not thoroughly, but I did document it and I am hoping to include it in this video. But now, days later, I finally have time to sit down and talk about all of these epiphanies that I've had recently regarding writing a first draft, writing a final draft, the mentalities involved, and I don't know, just some of these really groundbreaking ideas that I've kind of had, and hopefully they're groundbreaking for you. Maybe I'm alone here, we'll see. Before I dive into all of that, let's first talk briefly about being able to work on 2 works in progress at the same time, which, as I've said repeatedly already, I never thought that I didn't think I could do something like that. I have tried many a time to work on 2 books at the same time and it's just never worked. But I've realized that that's because I have been trying to write the first draft of 2 different books at the same time. And that I cannot do. Writing a first draft and writing a final draft are so radically different in my mind that it makes it feel like I'm doing 2 totally separate activities. I've actually started to look at final drafting like frosting a cake and first drafting like mixing the batter for the cake. To work on 2 separate first drafts at the same time is to create 2 different cakes from scratch, and you're pulling all of the scratch from the same pantry, and it just feels a little bit more overwhelming, a little bit more exhausting versus final drafting. I think pretty unanimously we all enjoy final drafting a little bit more than first drafting, and that's because we are frosting the cake at that point. The cake is done and now we're just finessing the details and it's fun, and it does feel like a completely different activity and one that's more enjoyable. I think our brains enjoy the final drafting process more than the first drafting process because our brains are exposed to final drafts almost exclusively. So as readers, we are reading the final draft of every single book that we're reading. We're never exposed to the first, second, third, fourth, fifth draft of that book. And so when we're writing, when we're sitting down to write a first draft, our brain's only frame of reference as far as what we want that draft to inevitably look like is a final draft. So we are not used to sitting in discomfort with the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on draft, however many drafts it takes to get to the final. And we are trying to make that first draft fit the only frame of reference that we have, which is a final draft. And I think the more that we part ways with the idea that the final draft and the final drafting process is the same activity as the first draft, the better off we'll be. The more we look at these as separate activities, almost separate mediums, the better off we will be. This has definitely helped me. I have started to look at first drafting as a completely different beast. We're mixing a batter from scratch. I love this analogy. We're mixing batter from scratch. Baking is not like cooking, where you're not doing everything to taste. It's very scientific. And in that way, I think that also makes this analogy really appropriate, because when you're putting together a first draft, you are following something of a template. Plot structure could be looked at as a recipe. And if you use too much salt in that recipe because you just decide to go off half-cocked one day and like hammer out a bunch of words, that could ruin the entire batch of batter. I've had that happen before. And I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier when I was talking about how you need to find your own first drafting system and your own first drafting mentality, because it is not all about just hammering out a certain number of words and calling the draft finished. You can have 150,000 words that mean absolutely nothing. You can have 150,000 words that mean you've only written the first act of the book and it's terribly paced and it's all bad and you need to throw it all away. Word count does not equal you have finished the manuscript by any means, and that's why I'm kind of vehemently against using word count in any way outside of just like what I said earlier, the logistical measuring of, is this a manuscript that fits within a certain age category and genre? Are these chapters paced well? Like using word count on a chapterly basis to me makes sense, because then you're not writing super short chapters and then super long chapters and then having everything feel topsy-turvy. The first draft is a recipe that needs to be followed to an extent. Okay, to an extent, because we also know that the final form is not going to look like a bowl filled with batter. It's going to look like a frosted cake. To me, it just all really makes so much more sense when I look at it this way. It's forcing me to look at these different stages in the writing process as indeed different activities altogether. And I think that's why it has been so easy for me to work on the first draft of Project Godspell in the morning and then the final draft of A Dark Sky Opens in the afternoon, because there's no crossover. There's no pulling from that pantry of scratch, if you will, to compose something out of nothing. And instead, I'm just finessing what I already have. To hold yourself to the standard of a final draft while you're drafting the first draft of a book, how many times can I say draft, is to try to frost the cake before you've even mixed the batter. This has enabled me to stay on track with my first draft because I recognize there's a recipe that I'm following. It doesn't do well to just arbitrarily throw things into a book and hope that it's going to end up looking like a final draft at the end of the day. The first draft should still, in my opinion, have standards. I'm not a huge, okay, so we've all read Bird by Anne Lamott. Obviously, that is probably the first craft book everybody should read. It's a phenomenal book, and she advocates for basically a zero draft, or what she calls a shitty first draft. For me, it's not about just hammering out words and calling that a zero draft and getting it out of the way. It's about accepting the fact that the first draft is meant to be shitty. It's meant to not be very good, but you still have to follow a certain recipe. You still have to follow the rules. Otherwise, you're going to create a batter that will bake into a cake that is inedible. We don't want that. So I don't know, maybe this is me having some kind of a weird epiphany that everybody else has already had, and I'm just like really late on the uptake, which would not be new for me, but this has just really changed the way that I've looked at this entire process. My feet are going to sleep, so I have to sit up a little bit for a second. Here. Sorry, I'm gonna let my legs come back to life because they're falling asleep. Basically, this has all just led to me creating a completely different set of rules and standards for myself as I ease through the drafting process. And I do think that reviewing, I'm pointing to my shelf because that's where every edition of my book is currently housed. I think reviewing the first draft that I ever wrote of When Stars Burn Out was really helpful because it showed me that I did follow a certain template. I did follow a certain pace. I didn't just throw shit at the wall and hope that it stuck. I did actually follow the recipe, but there were a lot of things that did end up being finessed and changed. There were things that were too bloated that needed to be shrunk down, and there were other things that didn't receive enough attention and conversely needed to be inflated a little bit. And I think that that is a very normal part of the drafting process that is hard for us to conceptualize when we're writing the first draft. Because again, I feel our brains are really only exposed to the final draft of a book. And so it's really hard to start acquainting ourselves with what a first draft is even supposed to look like. Exposing myself and reminding my brain of what a first draft has looked like for me has been an excellent reminder and exercise that things are meant to improve, but you have to start off with something that's actually functional from the beginning. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. And I somehow, with When Stars Burn Out, just lucked out in that I wrote a book that wasn't fundamentally flawed from the very beginning. I think this is also why a critique partner situation can be so mutually beneficial, because we're inadvertently exposing our brains to the evolution of a book. In being a critique partner, we're looking at the first draft, the second draft, the third draft. We're watching our friends who are writers level up every single time. And again, the brain does well with exposure. It does not do well with something that it's unfamiliar with. Aha, my camera died. I knew that that was going to happen relatively soon. Sorry, happy to get it over with though. Anyway, here's another observation that I've had recently that is very tied to the mentality of first drafting, the psychology of first drafting, that would fit really well in this video, and then I'm going to wrap it up because this is probably getting a little bit long. Psychologically, the brain prefers familiarity. The brain does not do well in an unfamiliar context or situation. So when you are writing a first draft and you've never really written a first draft before, that is going to feel a lot more challenging. The more you first draft, the more familiar that process is going to become and to feel, and the less jarring it's going to be over time. So if you're working on your first draft ever, cut yourself some slack. It will take time. It will take many first drafts for you to start to realize, oh, this is what this feels like. This is what this is meant to look like. These are the new standards that I'm supposed to be shooting for. Another thing though is that everybody's psychology is different and everybody's creative process is different. And so this is why it's so important to get to know yourself as a creative and to accept that not everybody is going to create in the same way, and nor should they. We should all be going about a different process that works for us, and we should leave ourselves the comfort of having some wiggle room as we discover that process for ourselves. And like I said before, we shouldn't just stick to a process that has worked for us in the past. I've heard many of my writer friends talk about how every book is different and every book kind of requires a different process. So just keep that in mind. But for me personally, I have realized that when I'm drafting a first draft, I like to embody a certain mindset that I've used in other capacities of life. So just hear me out here. Hang on, I need to get a sip of this really quick. I ended up buying, I think it was only $45. Anna, sit down and stop moving. I ended up buying this $45 attachment to my camera that helps cool it down, and it has made a remarkable difference. I love this camera, but I hate that it overheats so quickly, particularly during a talking head. So anyway, just click that on. Okay, so back to what I was talking about before, getting to know yourself as a creative and understanding your own creative process. I have realized, and this has taken decades for me to realize, I have realized that my brain in the first drafting process does not necessarily pursue perfection as much as it pursues uniformity. And this is something that I realized actually when I was journaling. I am somebody who is a relatively avid journaler. I kind of go in and out of phases where I journal a lot, but it has been a consistent practice of mine for probably the last 20 years. And I've noticed when I have a brand new journal, I'm very reluctant to crack it open and sort of defile it with my terrible handwriting and the inevitable mistakes that I'm going to make. I do have OCD, which I can talk about another day. It's not like the most serious OCD, but it definitely holds me back. I've had it my entire life. My brain is peculiar, is what I'm trying to get at. And it has a lot of idiosyncratic needs and wants and things that it's drawn to. And I did notice throughout my journaling history that it started to do something really interesting with a new journal. So when I got a new journal, I started to, on the first entry of a brand new journal, intentionally messing it up. And when I did that, it took the pressure off, and then I made sure to make every entry a little bit messy, because I realized that I can control messiness. I cannot control my level of being perfect, but I can control the level of messiness. And so I started to look at my journals less as journals and more like a scrapbook. And I really leaned in to sort of like crinkling up the pages and adding little bookmarks and sticky notes and doodling and making it feel more lived in. And that was when I realized, and this has been like such an interesting takeaway to have, I realized that my brain does not prefer perfectionism. It prefers uniformity. So it doesn't matter if the journal is perfect. It matters that the journal is consistently perfect or consistently imperfect. And something about that has really changed the way that I've looked at this first draft as I'm working on it, because this has made it so that I'm looking at this first draft from the sense of I'm shooting for uniformity and consistency, and I'm not shooting for perfectionism. This mentality has completely changed the way that I've looked at drafting the first draft of Project Godspell, because I am no longer shooting for perfectionism, which from where I'm standing would be basically the ideal final draft of the book, which again, the brain is most familiar with. So of course it's going to seek that out. But now that I've given my brain something else to familiarize itself with, something else to shoot for, a different standard, not perfectionism, but consistency, uniformity. That is something I can control. So instead of making every single sentence and paragraph and chapter in a first draft perfect, I am making it as good as it can be, but I'm leaning in to the same scrapbooking feeling that I've been applying to journaling. So I will include a lot of brackets. Sometimes I'll include brackets in chapters that I do feel do not require brackets, just for the sake of that uniformity. And that has helped a lot. So including brackets in every single chapter, including little snippets here and there, even like little reminders that I maybe don't need, but that will be helpful down the line, such as this lemon is meant to symbolize this, or this is acting as a literary device. It's a MacGuffin for this scene, blah, blah, something, something. All of that really helps me keep a finger on the pulse of what I want to be achieving in this draft, while also making it feel drafty and not final drafty. Drafty, but not shitty. You know, it just helps me kind of like straddle the line. I don't know if this is going to help anybody. I have never heard anybody even talk about this. Maybe it's obvious. Maybe I'm regurgitating things that people have figured out years ago. I don't know. But on the off chance that this is helpful, I thought it would be worth bringing up. And for me, it has definitely felt kind of like an interesting game changer. And I think ultimately the point is that you explore your own psychology, your things that make you you, your isms, and the way that you prefer to create. We all have different temperaments and personalities and preferences to take into consideration that are going to play pretty significant roles in our creative output from beginning to end. And I think getting acquainted with your own mind is only going to help you. So for me, beginning to look at drafting the same way that I would look at a journal, understanding that my mind prefers uniformity over perfection has been huge for me. And then also being able to sort of compartmentalize the way that I look at first drafting and final drafting and perceive them to be different activities altogether has definitely helped me sort of loosen my grip on this want to create a perfect first draft the first time around. It's also completely allowed me to break away from this interesting impulse to just get the words down and assume that that counts as progress, because it doesn't. Anyway, my friends, I'm going to close out with you. It's getting darker by the minute. I have editing work I need to be getting to, so I'm going to conclude this video now, but I've had a wonderful time sort of letting you guys into my drafting process, and I hope that this video helps in one way or another. I do intend to pick up the camera and start a new vlog literally tomorrow. I'm hoping to be a lot more consistent now that my schedule has balanced itself out and I'm feeling so much better, so much more harmonious. I hope to see you guys again here relatively soon is my point, instead of in a month from now. So have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day, and I will catch you guys here on my channel next time. Bye.